Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Jen, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Today, I am very excited to have two people on the podcast, Jen Fiser and Ed Levy. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
All right. So, hey, Jen. So I will start. I'll read Ed's bio first. And actually, let me read Jen's first. And then, Ed, I'm going to read yours and I'll have you fill in there. So Jen is, she's most recently been the clinical director at Innate Path, a Denver-based psychedelic psychotherapy clinic specializing in PTSD for 3 years. She was instrumental in developing the model of psychedelic psychotherapy used at the clinic, model utilizing the healing pathways inherent within the embodied subconscious. Jen leads an experiential cohort-based model of training through Innate Path for professionals who are working or are interested in the field of psychedelic therapy. The main goal of the training is to deeply engage each practitioner in their personal process as a foundation of the knowledge needed to be an effective psychedelic therapist. Ed, who was a client of Jen's, I was born in Brooklyn originally. He says that there were 3 more moves to different suburbs of New York City and finally back to Manhattan, where he lived away from his family. He found Vermont and sought sanctuary there for many years. He's recently divorced. 3 months ago, he moved from Centennial, Colorado, and recently moved to Boulder. Now, I'll stop there, Ed, and let you kind of orient us. You reached out to me a few months ago.
Yes.
And you were excited about what you wanted to share. You said you thought maybe bringing on Jen, who was your therapist at the time, would be a good idea. So let's start by sharing with our audience why did you reach out to me?
All right. I reached out to you. Well, first of all, I found your website and I was very impressed. And I wanted to reach out to people who are in the situation that I was in, which is deeply into PTSD. And I wanted, there are two things. I want to be known and I want to help other people who are about to end it. Because when I came to Jen, I was vacillating between suicide and not suicide. And that went on for days. And then I found her and her clinic, which ultimately saved my life. My PTSD started in my childhood, which is usual, I think. I had a violent father. I had a mother in her description, which was, maybe I loved you too much, and which extended to her taking physical liberties with me and my body that were totally inappropriate. And she did that until I was about 12 years old. I hid behind my mother to be protected from my father. My father was an alcoholic. He was very violent. He used to refer to me as it or the thing.
Yeah.
And so, were you going to say something?
No, I just said, wow. I mean, geez.
So I grew up, it's like they nurtured me to fail. And I was humiliated in the 3rd or 4th grade by a teacher who told me that I was dumb in front of the whole class. And as I've found out over the years, that's when I shut down to going to school. And I dropped out of school in the beginning of the 11th grade. And what that was about was I was scared to death that I might be called on. And then everyone would know I was dumb, like when the teacher told me I was dumb.
Right.
So let's jump ahead. So the trauma in my childhood, the next major trauma was when I was in my early 20s. I was in Israel as a tourist. I was feeling suicidal then. I was alone. I've had very little connection with people most of my life. And so I was feeling suicidal once again. I climbed the Golan Heights. I was captured by the Syrian army. I was blindfolded. I never saw the light of day after that for 19 months. They took me to a prison in Damascus. They put me in solitary confinement for 19 months.
Mm.
And I just deteriorated from there.
Excuse me, Ed, what age were you at that point?
22.
Okay. Okay. Let me, I want to stop you there with,
All right.
with all due respect. I want to bring Jen in here. I want you to share why you reached out to Jen. I mean, you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, you knew that the therapy that she was doing involved psychedelics, or
Yes.
did you not? Okay.
Yes, I did.
Okay. Had you had experience with those before reaching out to her?
No, I mean, I was doing psychedelics when I was a hippie.
Okay.
But I hadn't done anything since then.
Okay. So what was your reason for reaching out to her, knowing that was one of her modalities?
All right. As I said before, I was vacillating between suicide and not. The times when I wasn't vacillating, and I thought maybe there's still help for me. So I found Jen online, and in fact, I talked with Saj, who you know, and he was very welcoming on the phone. And I'm afraid of men, and because of my dad. By the way, just to digress for a moment, I was molested by a doctor on 2 different occasions when I was 4 years old. So I didn't relate to men very well. Anyway, so I came in to see Jen, and we had a couple interviews, and I told her I was interested in psychedelics, cannabis therapy, and then later ketamine therapy.
Had you tried therapies before?
I had been in and out of therapy since I was 14 years old.
Okay. So at this point, when you reached out to her, like you said, you were on the verge of committing suicide. It sounded like you were desperate.
Yes.
Okay. So
yeah,
Jen,
let me add a little into that. Ed has a similar story to a lot of people that showed up in our clinic, that they had tried many different types of therapy, anything from CBT to electroshock therapy to somatic experiencing to EMDR. People had tried a gamut, and usually over a long course of time. And one of the other therapies that Ed had experienced in his teen years was ECT, which ended up being the beginning of his treatment, was processing.
And just clarify what that is for listeners.
Electroshock therapy.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then Ed had spent many years in the church running groups for men, which was also a type of therapy. And that had disintegrated because of some, problems in the church, and he had lost that as well. So by the time he ended up at Innate Path, he was 79 years old, had tried everything under the sun, and was really just ready to try one last thing that may still, here's this new thing. It has a potential. I'm going to try it. Yeah.
Okay. And so how many years ago was that when you walked into her office, Ed?
I think it was a little over a year and a half, almost 2 years.
Ed, would you mind moving your microphone a little closer to your mouth?
Sure.
Yeah.
How's that?
A little more. Yeah. There you go.
Is that a little better?
It is better. Thank you.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So Jen, give us some perspective into your approach. what were you thinking as a therapist when you started learning more about Ed's story?
Yeah. So, our model was specifically to treat PTSD with psychedelics. And it was based on using the subconscious, using the psychedelics to actually get really reliable, quick access to the subconscious, and therefore the way in which the memory is stored, the way in which the threat's stored in the body, the way in which the memories are stored in the body. Um, that's our approach, and and we were doing weekly sessions at pretty low doses, which is considered a psycholytic model. It's not big doses of psychedelics where you have, and enlightened experiences that give you the 30,000-foot view and it changes your perception of the nature of reality. This is more low doses on a weekly basis that give you access to your body, to your memories, give you resource, and allow you to process through what you're holding on to,
And specifically,
because
excuse me, what were you using? You said psychedelics.
um, so at the clinic, clients were using cannabis or ketamine. And Ed started out using cannabis because that felt safest for him. And he used that for about, 6 months, 6 to 8 months, something like that, and then switched over to ketamine when he had, you know, really developed a sense of trust in the process, a sense of trust in his body and himself, and our relationship was safe enough. He went into what he thought was a deeper end of the pool with the ketamine, um, and I'll let him speak to that. But the idea is to allow what has been submerged, because often that's a big part. One aspect of the symptoms of PTSD is the management strategies, and
Mhm.
they can be, you know, make our lives very small when we've accumulated many over the years. And PTSD gets worse over time as we accumulate triggers, and we try to avoid those triggers. So those management strategies can be crippling. And one of the management strategies is suicidality. Well, if I have to, I can at least kill myself, and that's a management strategy. um, so one of the beginning of therapy is about working with those strategies, just starting to make contact with them and allow them to release. And you can do that with without psychedelics, but psychedelics help speed that process up. Then once those management strategies are starting to be set aside, then what they're protecting starts to emerge,
Mhm.
and there's an innate healing mechanism to release those.
Okay, so Ed, before we bring you in here, I just want to ask you one thing, Jen. So, and this for our listeners here, what is your role, the role of the therapist
Mm.
within the use of psychedelics? Because I don't want people to think that, okay, I'm going to smoke some pot and this is,
Mhm.
I'm free. So
Mhm.
what's the role of the therapist here?
Well, uh, the therapist needs to know the terrain, and what are the innate healing mechanisms and how to support them. They need to know that world, and they need to know it from the inside. And that's one of the reasons that we are running the training that we're running. Is it's very important for therapists to develop their own practice with their own subconscious and their own body, with the help of the medicines. And but the actual role of the therapist in the room is, in my opinion, very much like the role of a midwife. When you go into support someone in giving birth, you're not doing it, you're not making them give birth, but you're supporting a natural process that's really big and innate and can be trusted. And you're just making sure they're safe, the room is comfortable, you are familiar with the process, when something needs, when to tell them to push, when to help, help them work through fear, help them ease fear, etc.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, Ed. So, what was your initial experience when you started doing this work?
Initially, I was afraid um, of the unknown. I'm talking about the ketamine now. The cannabis, I had no fear of that. I didn't really remember how much progress that we actually made with the cannabis, but Jen has reminded me, I thought it started with the ketamine. And she said, oh no, you made so much progress with the cannabis. When I first started with Jen, I would go home after my 2-hour session and I would immediately get in bed and hide under the covers because all of this onion was beginning to be peeled.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't let go of anything yet. So I was very frightened. My body would move the same way it did when I was in the chair in her office. My body was releasing a lot of things. It's an amazing process. I was living in a house by myself, a tiny house, when I divorced my wife. So all of a sudden I lost a family and I was by myself. So I had a lot to work on. I'm still working on it with an associate of Jen's, and I've made tremendous progress. Anyway, so getting back to the ketamine, I never discussed with my family what prison was like. I never discussed with anyone. All I did with my prison experience was cocktail party talk, telling people, oh, I was in prison for 19 months. And that's the only discussion I ever had of it. And so things came up while I was in the chair on the ketamine, such as the minute I was captured by the Syrian army, they surrounded me and they all had machine guns. And I started being scared to death. And I stayed like that in my cell for quite a few months until I had a psychotic break. And I didn't realize I was having a psychotic break. I believed that what I was hallucinating was true. There was a light bulb in my cell that hung down a very high ceiling. When I started hallucinating, I thought there was gasoline inside of it and it was going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and explode and annihilate me. Another thing, there was a wooden door that led into my cell that was very thick, a big iron key. It was like out of a couple hundred years ago, this prison. And every time I heard the key go into the key slot, I thought they were coming to kill me. So I lived with that adrenaline for months and months and months. Every time they open the door, this time they're coming to execute me. So I lived with tremendous fear for that 19 months.
Let me
Go ahead.
ask Jen something here. So, as part of this Ed's therapy, how important was it for you to know and hear the extent of his experiences and his story?
It was very important, and having a witness, and some days I'm good at coming up with ideas as to why this is so important, but having a witness to our experience, all of our experience, is transformative in and of itself. So almost in a sense, when you're doing this kind of work, what Ed's saying is like he was going around talking to people about this on a very shallow level. But even he didn't realize, because he had suppressed the memory, what he was feeling and thinking at the time and the details of it. So as it's emerging, it's important that I hear it, and it was important that he heard it and felt it. because it was something that he was working very hard to push away for decades. It's almost like our experiences, like there's no way to get rid of it. I'm looking for a word. It's undeniable. We don't get to deny our experience. We can try, but ultimately it has to be seen by us and by others.
I'm assuming here that the experience of cannabis is less kind of quote intense than that of ketamine within this context.
Well, that's what I thought. I don't
Okay.
know if that's true,
Okay.
but I felt it.
It's not true, but a lot of people believe that. And so ketamine seems like the deep end of the pool. It's actually not. I would say cannabis is a little bit more intense.
So
Ketamine has a smooth sort of anesthetic quality that comes into play that makes it easier and less painful,
okay, so
less
those
uncomfortable.
okay, so those two elements were chosen for very specific reasons. What were those reasons? Why cannabis first, then ketamine?
Oh, well, he chose cannabis
I
first
see. Okay.
because it seems safer.
I see. Okay.
And a lot of people do. A lot of people do.
Okay. So Ed, let's kind of move on here. You start working, you shared how after your sessions you would go home and hide under the covers in fear. How did things progress for you?
Well,
Walk us through a little bit.
all right. Um, for over a year, I rarely left my house. I have joint custody of my Bernese Mountain Dog with my former wife every other week. So when I had him with me, I could leave the house. When I didn't have him, I didn't leave the house. And over this time now, what's happened is I don't need to have him with me anymore, but I choose to have him with me because it's so much fun having a dog that you love so much. But I wouldn't go to a doctor appointment unless he was with me.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't go shopping unless he was with me. So he was my emotional support animal, and he took very good care of me. And then gradually, I started to come out of this. I didn't associate with people for that time that I sequestered myself in the house. And I gradually now have made some friends. I've gone to a few seminars to broaden my mind. My goal is to understand what happened to me in prison and as a child, and what made me such an angry, lonely man. And I must say, I don't feel angry anymore. And the true Ed is I'm a lover of people and I love animals. And I would love to be of help to people who were in my situation. I really want to give it away.
Mm-hmm.
You can notice by what he's saying, like the parallels. I was in prison, this was happening. I was at home, this was happening. I got home and I went and hid under the covers. I was hiding, in the corner of my cell watching this light bulb. There were parallels throughout the whole thing. And, Ed would come in the next week and he would say, I'm still hiding. And I would say something like, well, basically the goal was at a certain point, once we processed the lesser traumas, was to get him out of prison. And that was the goal. And as soon as he processed that last piece, that was the scariest piece around prison,
Mm.
um he moved to the city that he wanted to move to. He started talking to people. He started doing things. He's,
Wow.
etc.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. I mean, it's pretty inspiring too, Ed. And I really appreciate you sharing that story. I mean, just to hear what you've gone through and the work that you did to kind of, if I may, become alive again. I mean, that takes a lot of friggin' guts. And it's hard. It's hard friggin' work to do it.
Yes.
When you say that, it brings tears to my eyes because I was in so much pain and now I'm not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think, it's no joke, to feel I mean, obviously we just touched, I'm guessing the surface of what you've gone through, but I think everyone can hear the amount of pain and torture that you went through. But to, get to the point where you say to yourself, it's either suicide or not suicide. um how did you actually get to the point where you were like, all right, I want to call this person, I need to get help? That even that in and of itself, I think, is a courageous act, right? You took that step. Why did you do that as opposed to?
Killing myself?
Yeah.
I'm a survivor. I survived my childhood. I survived prison. I survived the divorce after being married for 40 years.
Well,
And so the survivor took over, I think. At a point, the survivor said, you need help and you can get help.
so as we kind of wind down here, and usually I ask about a go-to book recommendation, but I'm not going to do that now. I want you, Ed, if you would, to offer some words to the people out there, the people listening to this, who, I don't know if, obviously they're not in your position, but maybe they're scared to get help. Maybe they're suicidal. Maybe they feel there is no help. There is no hope. What would you say to them?
I would say that I'm 80 years old now, and I didn't start what I call this reconstruction until I was 78. And what I say to them is there is hope for recovery. There are people that love you, because I didn't feel loved at all. And there's help out there. And personally, I'm feeling that in a lot of cases, this psychedelic medicines have worked. It's not an end all, but it worked for me. And I think it can work for you if you're out there listening to this. I'm 1,000 times better than when I first met Jen.
That's
If
awesome.
that's all right.
And for you, Jen, I want to ask about, the trainings and so forth, but I want to ask you that same question. As a therapist, what would you say to people out there who, I mean, Ed, it sounded like you were in a dire situation. You'd been
Yes.
through hell. I mean, what other word is there for what you've gone through? The the accumulation of traumas. What would you say, Jen? What would you offer to the listeners in terms of, if they're wondering whether or not there is hope or help or how to get it?
Mhm. Well, I'd say two things. One, this is one of the wonderful things about Ed and I getting to come on here and talk a little bit, is that it, what Ed is showing is we can transform at any point in our lives. It isn't, it's not too late. Just because you've been holding on to something for a few decades or 5 decades or whatever doesn't mean you can't still let it go. And that's important. I think for us all to keep in mind, because there's a cultural sense that as we get older, things become less effective or less, we're less capable of
Mhm.
healing or changing. It's totally not true, not at all. As a matter of fact, I think Ed had several advantages coming in at the time, that time in his life, because it, even though he was very scared, he'd also lived through a lot. And so he had like an equanimity that allowed him to continue, even though, he was alone in the house, which isn't ideal. That's not ideal.
Mhm.
But because of his, like his wisdom, um, eh, he could do it. So there's even advantages at different stages in our lives.
Right.
That's one thing. And the second thing I would say is, you know, what we're learning so much in the field of therapy about PTSD, which I think is has a lot has a widespread is a widespread cause for many of our symptoms. I think we don't see it that way, but that's how I see it. And we're learning a lot, and psychedelics being added to the mix of therapy at this point is going to um, it's going to force therapy to change,
Mhm.
because it opens us up to our subconscious in a very meaningful way. You don't have to sit there on a couch and, free associate for 20 years to get a glimpse of your subconscious. No, you can go right there. It's accessible to you. It's you. It's a part of you. And it runs by different rules. And those rules are very supportive of healing. And so the whole field of therapy is changing. And it's going to change, I would say, almost to, at the degree of 180
Wow.
in the coming years. So anyone who is struggling with PTSD, hang in there. You will have options, and very, very good options in the near future.
Awesome. Okay. So in terms of trainings for therapists, what do you do?
Um, we run small groups right now locally. We're working on developing something that can be done partially remotely, but our whole program is to kind of talk about what we found working at the clinic. And so we go over like mind, body, spirit, relationships. All of those are huge factors in the therapeutic healing. We go over that, and then we just have all of the students do, they don't practice as therapists, they become the recipient and the
Mhm.
observer, so that they can be in that place of vulnerability, and in that place of experience, and in that place of getting help, and in that place of understanding things from the inside out, which I think is going to be essential.
Okay. All right, Ed, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Um, my phone number, I'm glad to give, is 720-339-6570. And my email is a little lengthy. It's
Okay.
Algon. Go ahead.
I know. I was just going to say I have that, and I'll include that
All right, good.
In the show notes here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. And Jen, how about for you? What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Um, my email is jen@innatepath.org.
Okay. Awesome. Simple. Well, look, I want to thank the both of you for doing this. Ed, I want to thank you for reaching out to me and emailing me and sharing your story, because it's super inspiring.
Thank you very much, Guy,
You're welcome.
for having me.
You're welcome. Jen, thank you as well.
Thank you, Guy.
All right.
Appreciate
Take care.
it. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.